Reckon I ever told y'all how I ended up with this scar? I asked, leaning forward, arm half lit by the glow of the fire, tracing the long, jagged line along my forearm. No? Well, pull up close then. This one's a solo story. Just me, the tree, and a dumb decision that left a mark. It all started with a need to be alone. Work had been clawing at me from all angles, endless emails, clients who couldn't wait, deadlines that meant nothing and everything all at once. My phone never stopped buzzing. My head hadn't felt quiet in months. So one Thursday evening, I snapped. I texted the one friend who usually knew where to disappear into nature, and he gave me a name. Said it was a disused farm that someone had turned into a rustic campsite. Private, no reception, ocean on one side, hills on the other. He hadn't been just heard of it, and that was enough. Next morning, I was up before the sun, still dark in my apartment, city lights flickering outside the window, like blinking reminders of everything I was leaving behind. I brewed some coffee, strong, bitter, exactly what I needed, and started packing. Now, I'm no wilderness expert, but I ain't clueless either. I grew up around bush weekends and fishing trips. I knew what I'd need: tent, ground sheet, pegs, and extra rope, because I always forget how windy it gets, a thick sleeping mat, and my battered old sleeping bag that still smelled like campfire, foldable camping chair, food, some steaks, beans, rice, and a few cans of something unrecognizable but filling, water jugs, mini BBQ, and a small bag of briquettes. My tackle box, collapsible rod, and some bait I'd regret bringing in the heat. And of course, beer, because what's the point of all this piece if you can't crack? One open beside a fire. I tossed it all in the back of my dusty SUV. The back seat looked like a catalog of barely used camping gear and midlife. Crisis impulse buys. I shut the door, checked the med kit, half stocked, good enough, and pulled out of my driveway just as the city started waking up. Getting out of the city was a grind. Horns, construction, people who had somewhere to be and apparently thought I was in their way. But after an hour, buildings gave way to wide spaces. Concrete turned to cracked tar, then tar softened into dust. I followed the ocean highway south. Long winding curves, sharp turns with cliffside views that made you exhale without realizing it. The sky was a clean blue, not a cloud in sight. The kind of day you paint if you had just 3 colors. Seagulls called in the distance, and I cracked the window to let the salt air rush in. The smell of brine, old driftwood, and wild fennel growing near the road made me feel like I was shedding my skin with every mile. Traffic thinned until I was passing maybe 1 car every 20 minutes. A beat-up pickup with fishing rods strapped to the side. A camper van that looked like it hadn't been washed since 9 to 5. Then, nothing, just me and the hum of my tires on asphalt. The directions weren't on Google Maps. I had scribbled them down on the back of an old receipt. I slowed as I saw the landmark, a crumbling stone wall, overgrown with ivy, right beside a faded red gate. The sign was barely visible, just a hand-painted arrow and the word camp written in wonky letters. I nearly missed it. Slowed to a crawl, turned in. The road turned rough, all loose gravel and old farm ruts. Trees hung low on either side, scratching against the roof. Birds flitted between branches. No traffic. No sounds of anything man-made. I pulled to a stop halfway up the track just to listen. Silence. Only the wind rustling dry grass and the occasional chirp of a hidden cricket. I kept going. Another 10 minutes and the path widened out into an open field. Hills rolled off in the distance. Beyond them, the faint blue curve of the ocean. A rusted metal sign hung off. A crooked post. Tobias Hill Campsites. 1 to 4. No reception. No ranger's hut. Just numbered wooden posts and a water pump that looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. I found my spot, number 3. It sat tucked beneath 2 tall pine trees, with a clear view of the ridgeline to the east. A fire pit marked the center, and the grass around it was trodden just enough to know someone had once sat here. Probably long ago. I cut the engine and sat there a moment, breathing. I could get used to this, I said out loud to no one. I stepped out. The wind whispered through the pines like an old friend. I didn't know it yet, but this was where I'd leave a piece of myself, literally before the weekend was through. By the time I started unpacking, the sun was making its lazy climb past the ridge. Light poured through the trees in soft streaks, turning the dust in the air into little swirls of gold. Everything felt still, not silent in the dead way, alive with small sounds. A breeze hissed through dry grass. Insects clicked in the distance. Something small and feathered flitted from one pine branch to another above me, chirping like it was just as curious about me as I was about this place. I walked the edge of my campsite first, taking it all in. It was better than I'd hoped. To the east, the hills rolled gently into a jagged little ridgeline, purple at this hour, while the south opened into a wide, grassy hollow. I could even see a sliver of the ocean if I craned my neck just right through the trees. The spot was perfect. I popped the hatch on the SUV and started hauling my gear out, piece by piece. The tent came first, a green two-man dome I'd only used twice before. I picked the flattest bit of ground, about 5 meters from the fire pit and under the partial shade of the pines. I laid down the ground sheet, then hammered in the pegs, every thud of the mallet sounding like a drum beat in the stillness. Then the poles clicked into place, bend, slide, snap. I pulled the fly over the top and fastened everything down tight. Stepping back, I gave it a little shake, solid. The breeze tugged at one corner, but I knew it'd hold. Next came the chair, the BBQ, my cooler, and the table I always forget how to fold properly. I lined it all up like I was building a little kingdom. The sun was up now, warm on my neck, but not hot enough to sweat. I rolled up my sleeves and cracked a beer, not out of thirst, but out of tradition. I took a long swig and looked around. It was the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts stretch out. My brain hadn't been this slow in months. No notifications, no one asking where I was or what I'd forgotten. Just the crackle of leaves and the occasional distant bird call. Peace pure and simple. I spent the next hour setting everything just right. The sleeping bag unrolled and fluffed inside the tent. Water bottles stacked near the back wheel of the SUV, where they'd stay cool. Fishing rod assembled and leaned against a tree. I even dragged a big log over near the fire pit to use as a footrest. It didn't matter that no one was there to see it. I wanted the place to feel like mine. After a quick lunch on some cold meat and a slice of bread, I decided it was time to gather some firewood before the shadows got too long. There were plenty of dry branches scattered around the edge of the tree line. I grabbed a canvas bag and headed off, kicking through pine needles and the occasional twig. My boots crunched softly, the only sound besides the whispering wind. About 100 meters from camp, the trees got denser. Less light, more underbrush. The smell changed too, from dry pine to something richer. Damp earth, old bark, the faint scent of mushrooms. I breathed it in and kept walking, eyes scanning the ground for fallen limbs dry enough to burn. That's when I saw it. At first it looked like a rusted old wheel sticking up from the tall grass. But as I got closer, the shape of it started to make more sense. Curved metal arms, spokes a seat long since rotted away. It was an old piece of farm equipment, half swallowed by time. Maybe a horse-drawn tiller or plow. The kind you'd see in black and white photos from 100 years ago. The metal had turned reddish-brown, flakes peeling off in some places like tree bark. It must have belonged to whoever ran this land before it was turned into a campsite. Maybe left behind when tractors came around, forgotten by everyone except the birds nesting in the trees above it. I stepped closer, fascinated by the thing. It had that eerie beauty that old tools sometimes have, like it had a memory built into the rust. I reached out to brush a bit of moss off the side, and that's when it happened. I slipped just a little. My boot caught on a root, and I stumbled forward, throwing out my left arm instinctively. I caught myself on the side of the old plow, but right on the edge of a jagged, rusted piece of steel. I felt it slice before I saw it. A sharp, gritty burn across my forearm. Not deep, just enough to make me jerk back with a hiss. Damn it. I looked down. A line of red was already welling up through the cut. It wasn't gushing, but it was long, maybe 4 inches, and angry looking. Dirt clung to the skin around it, and I could already see rust flakes mixed into the blood. I pulled off my shirt sleeve and pressed it hard against the cut. It throbbed with a steady pulse, each beat stinging like fire. I wrapped the sleeve tighter around my forearm and stood still for a minute. My heart had kicked up a notch. Not panic, not yet. But my brain was already cycling through worst-case scenarios. Lockjaw infection, tetanus. I gave myself a few seconds to breathe, then turned and made my way back to camp. The walk felt longer on the way back. Every step I took, I imagined the bacteria racing up my veins. My imagination got cruel like that when I was alone. By the time I got back to camp, the bleeding had slowed, but the cut still looked raw and angry. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the little med kit. I hadn't touched it in over a year. Inside, 2 antiseptic wipes, some gauze, and half a roll of medical tape. No antiseptic cream, no gloves, no scissors. I muttered under my breath and got to work. The antiseptic wipe burned like I was dragging a matchstick across my skin. I clenched my teeth and kept wiping until the blood stopped rising. Then I wrapped it in gauze and taped it up tight. I sat there afterwards staring at it. My little reminder that I wasn't as invincible as I like to think. Still, I wasn't about to let a scratch ruin the whole trip. The sun was starting to dip below the ridge now, painting everything in soft amber and purple. Birds were darting between trees again, more active in the cooling air. I lit the BBQ and cooked up a steak. Nothing fancy, just meat, salt, and fire. It sizzled, spat, and made the whole sight smell like comfort. I ate slow, watching the fire glow and listening to the crickets take over where the birds left off. My arm throbbed, but I was okay. Tired, sore, but okay. I poured myself a mug of hot tea before bed, sat back in the camp chair, boots outstretched, and stared into the flames. It had been a good day, cut and all, and I still had tomorrow. I woke up stiff, the kind of stiffness that settles in when you've slept. Outdoors cold, creeping into your hips through the sleeping mat, shoulders aching from lying uneven. I shifted, groaned, and sat up inside the tent. Light leaked through the fly and pale stripes. Morning already. First thing I did was check the bandage on my arm. The gauze was stuck a little, dried into the cut overnight. I peeled it back slowly. The skin around the wound was pink and swollen, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. That was something. It didn't look great, but I'd seen worse. I figured it'd be fine if I kept it clean. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to nip at the end of my nose. Mist clung low to the grass, and everything was quiet except for a pair of crows cawing somewhere down the ridge. The fire pit had gone cold. I stirred the ashes with a stick, added some fresh kindling, and sparked it back to life with my lighter. Within minutes, the heat came back into my fingers. I boiled water for coffee in my old tin pot, burnt on the bottom, lacking from years of use, and poured it into my enamel mug. It tasted strong and bitter and perfect. The morning passed slow. I fished for a while off the rocks just past the edge of the property, where a narrow stream cut through the grass before slipping toward the sea. I didn't catch anything, didn't even see a nibble, but it wasn't about that. I just wanted the silence, the rhythm, the breeze over my face, the way the sun reflected off the ripples like dancing glass. But my arm was starting to feel wrong. It throbbed more than it had yesterday. I could feel the pulse in it, slow and deep, and the swelling had spread a little further up toward my elbow. I tried not to worry about it, tried to tell myself it just needed time. By the afternoon, I was back at camp, tending the fire again, stirring hot beans in a saucepan with my pocket knife. I lifted my arm to adjust my chair and winced. It was starting to feel warm to the touch. The skin around the cut was tight, and I could see a faint red line tracing along one of the veins near my wrist. That's when I knew it was infected. I didn't panic, not yet, but I stood there for a long while, staring down at it. There was nothing I could do now but wait it out and drive home first thing in the morning. I didn't want to cut the trip short. I was stubborn that way. I'd come all this way to be alone, to find some kind of quiet, and damn it, I was going to see it through. But that night I barely slept. The pain settled deep into my forearm, like a hot wire, throbbing, radiating. I tossed and turned in the tent, half awake, half dreaming. I remember once reaching over for my water bottle and nearly crying out just from the movement. By the time morning broke, I looked and probably smelled like a man who'd been out here far too long. I broke camp slowly, moving with one hand while the other stayed pressed to my side. My tent came down stiff and damp with morning dew. I shoved everything back into the car without my usual precision. more like throwing it in and hoping it stayed put. My last look at the site was through a fog of exhaustion and pain. The birds were louder that morning. The ridge glowed with golden light, but I wasn't in any state to enjoy it. I climbed into the SUV, started the engine, and eased back onto the gravel road. Each bump sent a jolt through my arm. By the time I hit the tar road, I was sweating despite the cool morning air. The drive back felt longer. Cars were more frequent now, other weekenders heading home, surfers with boards strapped to their roofs, families pulling trailers. I passed a service station without stopping, just kept going. Every part of me was focused on making it home in one piece. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was pale, nauseous, and dizzy. I didn't even unpack. I walked straight into the house, left the door open behind me, and called my neighbor to take me to the ER. The doctor didn't say much when he saw the wound, just glanced at it, cursed under his breath, and wheeled me straight to the back. They hooked me up to an IV, cleaned it properly, and gave me a tetanus shot along with a serious antibiotic cocktail. "You waited too long," he said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. I nodded, too tired to explain why. They kept me overnight for observation. Said it was a borderline case of cellulitis. Could have been worse. A few more days and I'd have been looking at something much uglier. When I finally got home, the place smelled like dust and unopened windows. I dropped my gear by the door and made a beeline for the shower. Steam rose up around me like fog in the trees, and I just stood there letting it all go. That scar, it runs down my left forearm now, long and pale like a lightning bolt frozen in skin. It's not ugly, but it's a reminder that peace and quiet are good. But being prepared is better. So now whenever I pack for a trip, I double-check that med kit. Make sure I've got proper disinfectant, up-to-date bandages, gloves, scissors, even a spare pair of tweezers. And if I can help it, I try to camp in a place with at least a sliver of reception. Not because I want to be reachable, but because I want to be found. If it comes to that, funny thing is, I still go back to places like that. Still crave the silence. Still love waking up to birds instead of alarms. But now, when I sit down by the fire and someone asks me how I got this scar, I just smile, hold up my mug and say, "Well, let me tell you."